We continue with analysis. We're now joined by SABC International News Editor Sophie Mokoena. Sophie, thank you so much for your time. Just walk us through what prompted South Africa to take this drastic step.
Well, we know that South Africa earlier on did file a case with the International Criminal Court. And the International Criminal Court looks at individuals in relation to abuse of human rights and being involved in genocide. And now they took a decision to go to the International Court of Justice, because the International Court of Justice look particularly to cases that are directed at violation of human rights and genocide. As we pointed out, the convention, the 1948 convention that was adopted, is the aim of ensuring that we don't witness what we saw during the First World War, particularly in relation to the genocide. And therefore, South Africa is pulling all stops to ensure that on all fronts you are able to try and push the Israel government and the defense force to stop the bombardment of Gaza. The attempt, I think, here is to ensure that you use all the arsenal that you have at international level, at the global stage, at multilateral level, to ensure that you are able to stop what is happening in Gaza, because people who are dying are women and children, and dying in their numbers. I mean, only a few days ago, the very same IDF did acknowledge that when they attacked a refugee camp recently, they killed more than 70 people. And much as they say it was a mistake, but at the end of the day, people have died. And this is not the only number. At the same time, in different areas, people were dying. The last time I spoke to Qatar, the spokesperson of Foreign Affairs, some few weeks ago, he pointed out that, I mean, at times when you drive around in Gaza after there was that truce that was violated, you just see bodies and the dogs eating the bodies of the people. What kind of the world we are witnessing? And I think South Africa, with its experience in relation to oppression and also colonialism, took a decision that the country can't just watch. They have to use all what is available at international level to stop what they call is a genocide. Because after the Second World War, the Security Council was set up. Many institutions were set up to ensure that we don't witness what we saw during the First World War and the Second World War.
And Sophie, it is, I mean, these examples that you are giving, you know, that make it increasingly hard for Israel to not respond in the manner in which everybody expects them to, particularly because you listen even to the UN saying that Gaza currently is a graveyard, particularly, you know, for children. So let's just recap. Pretoria already filing a case at the International Criminal Court. How different is then this case that is now before the International Court of Justice?
Well, with the International Criminal Court, the ICC at The Hague, the ICC will then have to do investigations. The prosecutor will then have to put a case before the International Criminal Court. In this case, individuals will be brought before the International Criminal Court. But with this one, the case will be investigated, and the International Court of Justice will then investigate the state or the countries. It will not be individuals, much as perhaps communication and letters and examples will be directed to individuals failure to act or to handle themselves in a manner befitting international multilateralism and peace and security in the world. But let's take a listen at what Professor D. Repladi had to say. You would recall that he was elected by the General Assembly, a South African, to be a judge at the International Court of Justice, and he is supposed to resume office in January. Let's take a listen at what he had to say when he is elaborating in relation to the difference between the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. Take a listen.
So the court is based in The Hague. And its functions, it's described in the UN Charter as the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. But its primary function is really to resolve disputes between states concerning international law. So if there's any dispute, it doesn't matter what the subject matter of the dispute is, whether the dispute is environmental issues, human rights, law relating to boundaries, who owns what territory, the law of the sea. As long as it's a dispute between states, the function of this court is to resolve those disputed matters. So the court is composed of 15 members. And there isn't technically under the statute geographical or regional representation, but there is a practice among states to vote in such a manner that the court actually represents equitable geographic representation. There's also been a practice in the past that P5 states are always represented, but we've seen that practice gradually changing. In 2019, the UK judge lost, and so for the first time in the history of the court, there wasn't a UK judge, and this year, last week, the Russian judge lost.
All right, that was, of course, Professor Dire Tladi. We are still in conversation with Sophie Mokoena. And Sophie, as we just wrap up our conversation, of course, we saw Algeria, Turkey and Pakistan being among the countries who have already called Israel's attack what it is, essentially saying that it is a genocide, what we are seeing. Are we likely going to see other countries join South Africa's current action?
When you look at the reaction, it was late yesterday in the evening. In some regions, it was midnight when you look at Asia. And of course, again, in other countries, it was already late. But how the statement gained traction, it speaks to the view of many people around the world. We saw those protests every day in different cities, including the West. You see thousands and then thousands of people taken to the streets. And I am sure that other countries are going to follow, as they did with the case that South Africa requested the International Criminal Court to investigate. We saw more countries joining, and I think we will see a similar situation. But in this case also, when you look at the International Criminal Court of Justice, already the court was dealing with Palestine-Israel matter. In relation to the dispute, this matter was forwarded or was presented to the ICJ by the UN in December last year. And we expect that case to be before the ICJ. Clearly, the ICJ responded yesterday to say that they've received South Africa's matter, and therefore I think they will handle this issue simultaneously. The complaint from the UN that was already there to say, please give us guidance how to move with this dispute between Palestine and Israel, and now South Africa. But let's take a listen again what Professor Dire Tladi had to say in terms of the UN case. This is a UN case that the UN presented before the International Court of Justice to investigate, and now South Africa with this one. When is the UN one going to be heard? Let's take a listen.
I believe it was in December of last year, the General Assembly adopted a resolution in which it requested the International Court of Justice to provide an advisory opinion on the rights and obligations of states, in particular Israel, in respect of the situation in Palestine. So the particular hearings of that particular advisory proceedings will actually be the first one in which I will sit on. It'll be I think on the 18th of February.
Right, of course, that was Professor Dire, who was recently appointed to the International Court of Justice. In conversation there, I was speaking to our international news editor, Sophie Mokoena, just getting more analysis and reaction following South Africa filing a case at the International Court of Justice accusing Israel of genocidal acts in Gaza.